and welcome to another episode of Kasper On BI. Today, we're going to talk about everything Datamarts. What is it? How do we position it? Who is it for? Where does it fit into the architecture? Maybe some of the things what's coming, because we have a very special guest, Charles Webb, who is the PM driving a lot of the Datamarts functionality into Power BI. So with that, let's go learn from Charles and let's go to the episode. So, Charles, great to have you here. Great to talk to you about your favorite topic, probably Datamarts. Maybe you can share what you do, what's your role at Microsoft?
Totally. So I'm a product manager here at Microsoft, and I work with our brilliant, CAT and CSC teams, including folks like you, other product managers, our field marketers, and the rest of kind of the Microsoft organization to build, cool products like Datamarts. So super excited to be on the show. Thank you, Kasper. And I got the sweetest job. So
yeah, I know. But we get lots of questions around Datamarts, so hopefully today we can talk about it, a lot of them. But before we go there, I always like to ask what has been your path, and I know you from some time before, but let's start at the beginning. And I also want to hear about basketball. So
yeah,
so let's start there.
So maybe let's start. So I first of all I went to University of Denver, and I chose University of Denver because I really wanted to play college basketball. And growing up, I was not the shortest guy, or I wasn't the tallest guy, in the world. I was probably one of the shorter guys out there. And in fact, for college basketball, I was the shortest guy in Division I. And so I walked on at the University of Denver. And I also studied economics and a bunch of other things. And ultimately, this led me into consulting. And when I was in consulting, everything that we did always revolved around data and analytics and insights. And we were giving a presentation to provide insights or help an organization deliver some kind of outcome. It was always about what is the data telling us, what are those key drivers of impact, and how can we move the needle.
Yeah.
And so at some point in my consulting career, everything that we did was literally about analytics, and that kind of drove me to say, well, why don't I go deeper into analytics consulting? So I did that for a while, and I had an opportunity to join Microsoft out of Western Europe in the Belux subsidiary, and I jumped at that opportunity. And this was really neat because I got to work with our global customers, and it also gave me a unique perspective on NATO and the EU, and then some of our really big customers in that region. And this is also when I got a chance to meet and work with you.
Yeah.
And so it was super cool. I was a cloud solution architect. This gave me the opportunity to work with our customers hands-on, helping to craft architectures, helping them to work through how can they build intelligent industry solutions. And then ultimately, I had a chance to join the product team for Power BI. And I was a product manager for Power BI Dataflows, which is pretty sweet. Dataflows are our data prep solution for Power BI, and it allows you to do no code, low code data prep using Power Query. And then I had an opportunity to start working on this new project called Datamarts. And at the time, Datamarts was this top secret thing that we were working on, and it started with a lot of ideation and whiteboard sessions, and then feedback from the field. And if you look at Power BI, even the Windows Store application, the number one voted idea is actually bring SQL to Power BI. And so we looked at that, a couple of years ago. We said, let's do it. And so I had the opportunity to sort of lead that effort and work with a number of our talented engineers and product managers. And here we are now. And so it's a super fun job, super cool. It's been really neat to deliver things that customers wanted and be at the forefront of doing fascinating things that help folks do analytics better.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Okay, so let's hear it from you. What is Datamarts in your words?
So Datamarts is an interesting solution. It's a combination of data prep, a relational database, and a semantic layer built in. And this allows you to take advantage of things like end-to-end analytics and unified analytics, where traditionally you'd have to build an ETL pipeline and relational database, and then a semantic layer or Power BI data set. And then you have to orchestrate all these things, keep them in sync with multiple pieces of technology. And then ultimately, you have to figure out how you'd host these solutions and then serve them for downstream analytics. And now in Power BI, you can kind of do all these things in a single pane of glass. And we're also introducing new experiences to allow folks that traditionally try to do types of analysis that are hard in Power BI. Think like big, wide, flat tables, multi-table joins, ad hoc analysis. With SQL now and visual queries, you can do these types of analyses really easily. And so, like the power of a data mart is definitely in the SQL database and being able to store and collect and analyze your data. But it's also in bringing relational analytics in a single pane of glass for those departments or business units that are trying to do analytics, and particularly self-service analytics. They're thinking about things like data mesh and data as a product. They're really trying to just be data driven.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then some of the questions that we get asked on the CAT team, but also in the field, and I see it on Twitter, and like, who do you think Datamarts is for?
So I think data marts are for the analyst. So again, the analyst today may not have all this, awesome power. And with data marts, they, get data prep and relational database, now semantic layer, and that single pane of glass. But I also think they're for organizations that are trying to move at the speed of data. And so traditionally, if you wanted to do these things today, it requires a ton of overhead and PaaS solutions. And now we've delivered the kind of ability to do this really quickly and very efficiently. And so for the analyst persona, for the developer that's used to, writing SQL, but also, is really savvy in things like Excel and spreadsheets, and they're coming up with things every day to answer those business questions of the day, they now have a, complete enterprise ready tool to do this at scale in Datamarts with Power BI.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you probably, I don't know if you listened to my podcast I did on Datamarts too. I mean, I kind of equate it to, like, to me, the biggest thing that Datamarts, the gap that it fills is for those Power BI developers today that have a hole in their solution, because you get a Power BI Pro license or premium license, and now you can build a model. But what about all the stuff before that? Like,
exactly,
it doesn't exist. And now with Datamarts, they have the ability and the capability to do so. But so what about the flip side? I mean, we've all seen it on Twitter and we've heard it, and like, oh no, my whole organization is moving data left and right and I have no control over it. And what do you say to that?
So I would say that, the need for self-service analytics and answering those ad hoc questions of the day is not a new need. So we've seen this, years and years ago. And I feel like the analytics space goes through these revolutions and they come up with new things. So you're hearing right now talk about the metrics layer. And this is something that Power BI did years ago with, semantic models and data sets. And you're also hearing about things like, hey, we're building silos. And I would say that Power BI Data Mart is actually uniquely equipped to help you eliminate silos because it's integrated completely with the rest of Power BI. So you get things like DLP, data loss prevention. You get things like sensitivity labels. You also get things like the ability to audit everything that someone does within a data mart. Look at all the queries that someone sends and analyze those. And then everything is integrated and controllable within the same way that you govern all of your data sets, data flows, and other things within Power BI today. So from a silo perspective, I would say that being able to certify, promote, and then ultimately house all of your analytics artifacts, even if it is departmental-led self-service analytics, in a single pane of glass, and then present all those things for a business user or an analyst within an organization, helps actually pull all of your analytics solutions together and help your organization find more value with all those different things that folks need to create at the speed of thought and data. It's not like that need is going to go away, but if you can come up with a way to centralize it, catalog it, and govern it, this seems to be a better solution than, working with spreadsheets and other things.
Yeah. Number one data source is Excel spreadsheets hiding in a SharePoint list. So folder.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, and then going back to, like you said, like this essential layer. So for those of you who haven't played around with it, like and this is hard to wrap your head around. It was even for me too. You have one UI that generates or does everything from data ingestion to the way that the SQL is stored, the way the data model is created, the way that the security layer is there, right?
Mhm. Yep, that's right. So when we
Uh,
talked with analysts, one of the things they told us was it's very difficult to, even with Power BI today, to build that complete end-to-end solution like you described. And they talked about the different moving parts and things that they would use to orchestrate and keep these things in sync. And so with Datamarts, we explicitly said, how can we make that easier and obfuscate a lot of those details so you can just focus on the job at hand? If it's getting data in, we have Power Query. We just have access to those hundreds of data sources there. If it's data modeling, we provide that model view that's familiar from Power BI so that you can just focus on that. You want to add measures and catalog additional pieces of your information where you're adding those business semantics, hierarchies, things like that. You can do that. And then if you need SQL, guess what? It's a relational database with the ability to write queries, save those queries, and more right there. So yeah, it's a lot of things behind the scenes, but the beauty of the data mart is that we don't ask you to really manage any of that. It's all SaaSified for you so that you can just focus on analytics, ad hoc analysis, downstream, value for your stakeholders.
Yeah, but what about those people who say, but I have this very complex model, never will be able to do that with Datamarts?
We see a lot of different patterns where data marts can complement those use cases. So data marts absolutely, for sure, are not a replacement for a semantic model, particularly those that are super complex. But they do have a story where it could, accentuate that. One instance where that could be the case is when you're building a semantic model and you need to conform certain facts and dimensions. This is a great place to actually store all that data. And this also gives you the added benefit of when someone needs to go build something that's very similar to the model that you have, but maybe it's a one-off or it's for a particular, more specific business case. They
Mhm.
can use SQL to either query that data and come up with those simple questions or actually build a brand new model. And you can relate all those things back because of our lineage and built-in impact analysis. So you can kind of discover how all these things are related and how it's kind of 1+1 =2 versus, this or that. So I think there is a sort of synergistic story between the two, but this is definitely an area where if you're using Pro Tools and you're, using and loving semantic models and, data sets in Power BI, definitely look to Datamarts if there is a valuable use case for you to move. Don't just think about migrating, is what I always tell
Mm.
customers.
And so that kind of brings me to the next topic too, because like imagine you want to build your own, like you have a more complicated model, you want to tinker with Tableau editor and do all kinds of stuff
Yep.
on it. So that
Mhm.
kind of leads to, okay, so what do I use? Datamarts or Dataflows?
Mhm. So the way I used to be the PM for Dataflows and Power BI, and the way I think about Dataflows, and if you look at our roadmap, we published this explicitly for Dataflows. But Dataflows are for data prep. They use that Power Query experience that's familiar in Excel, it's in Power BI, desktop even, and then it's in things like analysis services, Dataverse, Power Apps, that whole Power Platform ecosystem. You'll see the Dataflows capability in Power Query shine through and through. So here in Power
Yeah.
BI, data flows are no different. And if you look at the Gen 2 roadmap for data flows, they're explicitly doubling down on data prep and they're allowing you to output data to different destinations. So with this, Datamarts are sort of the precursor to that capability. We use a data flow internally to load data actually to the Datamart, the relational database behind the scenes that
Mm.
powers it. And so the way I think about it is data flows are for ETL and data prep. And then your data mart is for when you need to actually store, analyze, perform the ad hoc analysis, conform some facts and dimensions, and ultimately serve downstream analytics. So it's really,
Mm.
again, a 1+1 =2 scenario. It's not, this or that. There are a lot of use cases where there's data flows are a really good fit for this. You're trying to just serve a downstream data set. You don't need SQL. You don't need some of these other, relational analytics. And you have a very specific use case. Hey, you can reuse your data pipelines, and a data flow might be a good fit.
So can
But
I
as soon as you
also,
have these needs,
so can I
yeah,
already reuse today Dataflows in Datamarts? Like let's say I already have a table of persons that I've done all the work with Dataflows. Can I reuse that in Datamarts?
yep, absolutely. When you start and create a data mart, there's a data flow watermark. And we're doing this explicitly because we know that data flows are for ETL. That means any data flow that you've ever created, you can use to start creating your data mart. You get the added benefit of things like row level security. So we see a lot of customers today in data flows, building data flows across workspaces because they need a security element to it.
Mm.
With data marts, that's already built in. So if you're trying to serve, data flows explicitly for things like downstream analytics, and let's say you're using the enhanced compute engine or direct query for that, Datamarts could be a really good use case where you can replace and simplify a lot of your architecture. But you can still use the data flow for ETL, which is what it's really made for.
Makes sense. And then, like playing devil's advocate, do we still need a data warehouse?
I would say yes. Datamarts are not meant to be a data warehouse. They can serve that pattern of self-service data warehousing where you were trying to use a data set or maybe a data flow or some combination. This is purpose built for that type of pattern for self-service needs, but it's not a data warehouse. It's not a replacement for a data warehouse. And that's why we called it a data mart. The idea is that if you have a data mart, you have a data warehouse, there's also this synergistic relationship where if you need workload isolation, or you need to move a little bit faster, and you want to, even leverage those, bits of business logic that, IT or your, analytics team's already curated, but now you're a business or department and you have very specific contextual information you need to analyze really quickly. You can use these both in unison and harmony. And then on the opposite side, if you're a smaller organization, you're not quite ready for a data warehouse, but you're ready to do some sort of lightweight citizen or self-service data warehousing. This can, fill that gap.
Makes sense. All right. So, a lot of folks, like you saw that you were already answering people on Twitter and asked the questions for this show, but like a lot of people want to get more control over the SQL Server under the covers, right? They want to be able to see views, create views, statistics. Like they want everything on the database. What are you thinking here?
So our vision for Datamarts is definitely to remove some of those manual tasks of, SQL Server lore. So we're already doing a lot of things to optimize the database, whether it's, statistics or it's, CCIs by default on all tables that we create. We're really optimizing this, database for analytics already for you. But we are hearing that feedback that you want additional capability. One of the top voted ideas is for DML, DDL. We've heard your use cases. These are everything from, I want to build Power Apps to, Power Automate so I can have data-driven actions to, hey, now I want to do, more pro tooling so we can bring additional pro developers into the fold and now have this world where we have Fusion developers that are, citizen development led. And then you also have pro developers where, these folks can work in harmony. So we've heard all that feedback. I would say DML and DDL, some of the top voted ideas. This is something that, we're actively considering. So things like views, we've heard the feedback. I heard from Marco Russo directly that, hey, we really, really, really need views. And, I can definitely say we're working on delivering on all of the asks that, the community has provided to us. So definitely appreciate that. And I would say in terms of more management capabilities, we are trying to remove the need for those management capabilities. So when it comes to things like having to tune the database, we're making sure that we tune it for you so that you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, just complain to us when it doesn't perform and then we get the feedback and then we can tweak it. That's exactly
the nice thing about being in preview is that we love all that feedback and we're using that to incorporate improvements in the product in like real time. So the more that folks tell us, hey, this is what they need and these are new ideas that they have, this is literally the time, and this, Kasper, we're literally in semester planning right now. This is the time where we love all that feedback so that we can incorporate it into what we do over the next few months.
Yeah, makes sense. So, and one more question that came up on Twitter too. It's like some people want to capture changes over time, like slowly changing dimensions and things like this. I know that's pretty complicated to build into a automated system, but is there any thought around this?
Yeah. So as part of like DML, DDL, one of the things that you'll be able to do is, support slowly changing dimensions, whether it's, SED2s, SED1s, or it's things like, hey, I want to use ADF and some of the, SED templates they have to actually load and store and record all that information. One of the valuable bits of having a relational database is being able to do those types of things. And you can imagine how we talked about the Power BI data set story, how that can become a lot more powerful too when you have this relational database all in Power BI where you can do those types of things. So I would say keep voting because that's, all covered under that DML, DDL idea, views, things like that, but then also the stored procedures and other functions that you'd be able to do to support those SEDs are all the type of thing that we're definitely considering.
That makes a ton of sense. So, and you talked about it a bit too, like preview. We're currently in preview. Where are we in preview land? And I don't know if you can tell us anything, but make sure you don't tell too much. But where are we in preview land? Everyone wants to know, when is GA?
Yep.
Yeah.
So right now in preview land, if you think about it, we launched Datamarts late May, so we can call it June. And then it was the summer months. So we got a lot of really interesting feedback, and we've been just working through a load of feedback. And so generally what we like to do is make sure that we release the product, we give it some bake time, and then we listen to your feedback. We've already gotten amazing feedback, but now is the time to actually deliver on all the asks. So I would say a lot of how we deliver Datamarts in the next few months and the path to GA is dependent on that type of feedback and what you tell us. There's a number of things that the community's asked us to do. We need to now deliver it, get the feedback, and then we also have internal goals of things that we need to do to make sure that the product is super reliable. It's compliant across a number of regions and geographies. We want to make sure that Datamarts are available everywhere, super reliable, have great uptime, great performance, and ultimately our product that you love. And I would say we are still very early in that journey. There's a lot of things that you as the community have told us you need. But I'd also say we're executing pretty aggressively. So one of the things that came out, I want to say late last week, and it's rolling out this week if it's not out already, was the community request to allow Datamarts to be enabled for specific users or groups. So we just delivered on that ask.
It's out. It's out. It's of course it's out.
So this is a big one where I know that folks pulled me aside when I met members of the community or our customers and said, "Hey, we really need this feature," and we delivered on it. But there's a number of other things and ideas that are bright and shiny, and the votes keep going up that we have to deliver on. So I know it's a very sort of high level answer, but it really does depend on the feedback that this community is giving us. I think that's the beauty of preview. You kind of get to try the product for free, be super candid about what works, what doesn't. Yeah. And keep it real with us. And then we get to keep it real with you, build as much as we possibly can, get to a good point, get it to GA. But then the best part is the features don't stop. They just keep coming and keep coming.
Well, that's the joy of working in Power BI. So,
absolutely.
All right. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. We already talked about preview. We talked about free. When are we going to be able to see what it's actually going to cost me?
So this is something we're working on. So when we announced at Ignite, one of the things we said was before we go GA, we want to provide you with an ability to see what it's going to look like on your premium metrics app so that you can kind of plan for it. Think about whether you need departmental level chargebacks or billing, or if you just need to set up some processes around Datamarts more explicitly. And so part one of that is we wanted to make sure you have the right control to actually go try it, hence the the AD switch. But now part two of that is we have to go deliver that functionality. And that's something we're actively working on. So I would just say stay tuned on that. We've said that we don't want to GA the product until we give you some runtime with that capability as well. So add it to the list of things that we know we have to do before.
I hear the collective sigh of Power BI admins around the world now.
Yeah, it's admins. We have not forgotten about you.
Good,
we talk about you every day, and this is something we know we have to do.
Yes, and you hear it from us too. Yeah. All right. So let's say I'm a Power BI developer today, and I only do Power BI desktop, and I hear this Datamarts thing. Where do I start? How do I get going? Is there anything I need to learn?
So you don't need to learn anything. That's one of the beauties of Datamarts, but there are some things to consider. The first is it doesn't replace what you do in desktop, and I want to say that explicitly because the power and the capabilities that you invested your time in are super valuable, and they only get accentuated with Datamart. So if you spent time learning Power Query, guess what? We use Power Query a ton in Datamarts that we allow you to have that cognitive transfer and also immediate productivity in the Datamart. But when it comes to how a Datamart can benefit your day-to-day, think about those tasks and those types of analysis where you have to build, let's say, that really big report that's just providing basically data access. And now we've released this Datamart capability that allows you to provide data access and those ad hoc capabilities a lot easier than, let's say, that 5-page report with basically tables in it. So use cases where you're trying to provide access to data, you're trying to enable folks to slice and dice, but it's really for a true self-service capability. This is where the Datamart is just another tool in your toolbox, and you can think about it like another way to unleash your data and unlock insights for folks where you don't have to build every single bespoke chart or graph. So you don't need to learn anything there. But one thing to keep in mind is as you're building out these types of solutions, the pattern with which you do it is a lot different. Whereas a semantic model is about a very specific type of analysis, you can go a lot wider with a data mart, bring in a lot more data, and think more about, hey, I don't necessarily know the specific types of questions that someone has, but I do, and I have the capability now to create a star schema and allow them to go crazy with what they might need. And so again, this is just another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah.
You're building, data sets, specific reports today, keep doing that. But now when you get specific requests from, let's say, finance or supply chain about a particular business problem or contextual needs for a particular domain, this is where a data mart can be explicitly inserted in there to help you do a little bit more, and your organization and your stakeholders do more with data too.
Yeah, and then so let's say, to me, the biggest thing that Datamarts, first of all, it's like for the analyst who just wants to, it's easy to get started. Like you got some data and you end up with a report. You didn't have to do much in between. So that's really good. But I think the biggest piece that we're missing today in Power BI, as I said before, today you have to do a lot of gymnastics to get the data into Power BI. Power Query is amazing and great, but if you can't land the data somewhere and then do stuff with it, like now a lot of people have like files sitting somewhere in the SharePoint folder, and then they import that data into Power BI and they have to do gymnastics to get it into nice tables. It gets tough. It gets slow. You get bad DAX. With Datamarts, I see it like, okay, now I have the opportunity to really think about my ETL much more than I was able ever to do before. So I think to me that's and then so I think I already know the answer, but I want to hear you say it. Like okay, so now I have that data sitting in like a nice star schema in Datamart. Can I now connect my desktop to that?
Yeah,
and use it?
Absolutely. So we talked about that citizen, data warehousing pattern where we see, customers trying to use data sets or trying to use data flows for this. Data marts are a much better fit for that type of pattern. And we have a native connector inside of data hubs that you don't need to know and fiddle with connection strings like you do with PaaS solutions. You can literally say, yeah, there's a data mart there. It's endorsed. I can see the sensitivity label and I can just connect to it. And then you have the option to either connect, if you're an analyst and someone who just likes Power BI data sets, to that auto-generated data set that we create for you, that semantic model, or just to the SQL endpoint when you want to slice and dice and build your own model that's custom.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful to me. So, okay, so that's the getting started. So the getting started is like, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Just go and get going. So what are some of the common problems that you see that people fall into? Or everything is great?
So I don't know if there are any common problems, but I will say that a data mart is sort of a step up from the things that you might do today. So if we look at the typical analyst, there's a number of different things that they might do. Some of them may build reports. Some of them may work on just data flows. Some of them may work outside of Power BI, and they might use SQL and other tools. With data marts, we bring a lot of these things together. And this is a lot of cognitive capabilities that are different than how they work today. So I would say the biggest thing with data marts is just understanding that there's a lot in that capability and there's a lot of power. And with great power comes a great responsibility. Now that you have a lot of these capabilities that were traditionally, in Azure PaaS or in other clouds, now you're this pervasive. What I would say is just recognize all the power that you have and, definitely try to take advantage of it in a way that helps the organization move faster, not slower. So this is where you can use things like endorsement, help people know what the right data mart is that they should be accessing, or sensitivity labels so you can make sure that confidential information is truly secured, or lineage so that you can understand, hey, where did this data come from? What's powering the data mart? And then what are the downstream impacts of a data mart when I make changes? We did deliver deployment pipelines that you can sustainably build these data marts and deploy them right inside of Power BI. So that if you're using and following these best practices, you can really make sure that you can move very fast at that speed of data, like I said, but also in a sustainable way. And so I'd say, like, with this power, you really do need to work to make sure that what you're building is curated and is used, very thoughtfully.
Makes sense. And that brings me to the next topic. Let's say I'm a Power BI admin in my, and I'm administrating Power BI in a large organization. I have all the tools I can see who's building data sets. I can see who's doing things. What do I need to do to feel comfortable about Datamarts? Is there anything?
So there's a couple things that we did with Datamarts that will make you feel more comfortable. First, all those things I talked about that come into our like enterprise information management story are
Yeah.
just included and built in. But the second thing is that typically as a admin, you're familiar with the APIs and the other capabilities, and Datamarts support those APIs so you can understand who's creating what in your organization. And then lastly, because Datamarts are built on top of Azure SQL, all that wealth and depth of capabilities to monitor and manage the SQL database from that perspective are available as well. So things like query store and DMVs are available from the Azure SQL database directly. This gives you an added layer of analysis over what are people doing, how are they analyzing the data, and what's important to them. And this is actually very, very much more accessible than, let's say, APIs, because you can just use a SQL connection to get to that data and even build your own Power BI reports. And it's that raw data where you can do whatever you'd like. So I would say that Datamarts provide a very deep level of monitoring and management. But as a Power BI admin, it is a new service area. But definitely rest assured that we are thinking actively about how to make sure that you can easily govern, manage, and plan for these things. And this is why that feature that you talked about, we just announced it at Ignite and said, hey, look, don't worry. We will provide you with the right level of visibility in your capacity metrics app so that you can adequately plan. And we'll keep it in preview until we can do that.
Yeah, makes sense. And then all the tools that people use today to see which data sets are there. So Datamarts automatically flow into those same APIs now also expose Datamarts, right?
Yep.
All right, that's pretty cool. And then maybe you said something that I didn't know either. So and maybe this gets a bit more technical, but okay, so I create a Datamart and I get a SQL Azure database, right, under the covers.
Yep.
So what can I do and what cannot I do? What can't I do with it from like when I connect with SSMS to it? What is there for me?
So right now we don't allow you to do DML, DDL. So you can't create tables, store procedures, views yet. But you can get access to the DMVs, and these provide you with a way or view into the database, some of the other happenings. So whether it's query activity or other information, you can use things like the query store or those other, dynamic management views, as they're called in SQL, to analyze the activity of what's going on in your database. There's a ton, a plethora of information that's available out there. We'll continue to document that and make that available on our docs, so it's very easy and apparent to understand like what you can do and why you might do it. We started this series of blogs where we're talking about how to get started with Datamarts, and we talked about creation and consumption. The last one in the series is going to talk about administration, and we'll cover additional things like this too, in addition to our docs, just to make sure that folks know from a scenario perspective how they can take advantage of all those capabilities. Our Azure SQL friends have done a great job at making sure that it's easy to monitor, manage, and govern the Azure SQL database. This is one of the reasons why we built it on top of that, because the Azure SQL database capability is a real workhorse. So it's awesome to just be able to build on top of that and bring the full power of Microsoft Analytics just to a customer from a SaaS point of view.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, so I can do so when I have a workspace, it's similar to like data sets, right? I'm a contributor, then I can do anything with the Datamarts. Even through not yet through the endpoint, but like, for example, if I'm a contributor on the workspace, I can send XML commands to analysis services or the data set and make changes. That's the same philosophy for Datamarts.
It's similar. We still also have an owner. So the owner controls the data sets, the data sources that a Datamart can load into. We also allow multiple contributors. So if you have a member contributing in the workspace, they can actually go into the Datamart and collaborate with the owner to make changes to the Datamart. And then separately, this means that all these folks have the ability to go look at all those metrics within the Azure SQL database themselves if they connect through SSMS, or Azure Data Studio.
And actually, do we also have a connection? I don't know, and make it easy connection. I know it's possible, like paginated reports. Like, do we have a button or something, or?
That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I'm pretty sure we can. I mean, it's a SQL endpoint, so.
I'm pretty sure that works, but I don't know when you say easy connection. I don't think we have the data hub experience in the paginated report builder for desktop yet. So I don't know if we surface and make an easy connection yet for those kind of capabilities. But I know our paginated report friends are also asking us for things like table value functions. Again, DML, DDL will be very nice for them, so they can write stored procedures and these functions to be able to return, really beautiful reports that are built also on top of a data mart. This is why that, vote and upvoting that is super critical for us. Please, shamelessly going to just say, please do vote for that idea continuously, because this is one of the things that I think will really unlock the power of a data mart.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so maybe let's talk about some best practices. So is there anything there? You already said there's not really a common problem you've seen yet, but are there some best practices, things you would recommend, both from an author, but also from an administrational standpoint?
Yeah. So the first is, I would say, leverage workspace roles. They're very powerful, and they allow you to do the kind of, dev test and evaluation of a data mart that you would need, especially, taking into account all this new power. And if you're using workspace roles, the next best practice would be like, hey, use deployment pipelines that you can actually promote these things, like I said, from dev, test to production. So those are two best practices right off the bat. Leverage the workspace roles so you can collaborate and work together, and then leverage deployment pipelines. Now, the next thing that's a best practice, I would say, and it really pulls in the value from Datamart, is to use role-level security. So, as you're building these departmental self-service-led analytics efforts, security is always, of paramount importance. And role-level security inside of Datamart secures your whole kind of estate from that perspective. And it allows you to ensure that you've got the right security profile on all of your data. Now, after that, the next thing is use, the sensitivity labels and the DLP capabilities that we provide, just so that you can continue to make sure that that estate is secured. This allows and makes sure that things like export scenarios and more are secured the right way the organization needs. And after that, endorse the data marts that folks know, hey, look, this data mart is of critical importance to this particular organization and it's trustable. So after we talk about those things, I would say it comes down to some of those, self-service data warehousing best practices, things like build a star schema, think about conform facts and dimensions where it makes sense. And then, lean into things like data sets and data flows to make your life easier. So data sets, particularly when you have those complex semantic models, are an awesome way to accentuate what you did in a data mart. Pull in those conformed, facts and dimensions, but then go and build a, very complex model where you have the full keys to the castle from the data set perspective, use external tools, all that good stuff. And then separately, use data flows, especially when you want to make sure that you want to reuse these pipelines, if you will, for other needs. So I would say using all the stuff in Power BI and just providing the data mart as another capability or tool in the toolbox is the right way to think about a data mart. And if you follow all those best practices, it'll make your life a lot easier.
That makes sense. Okay, that brings up another topic. So today, when you create a data mart and you have a semantic model on top and you create reports, it's in direct query mode, right?
It is, but then it's not. So what we do is we have this feature called proactive caching. We just blogged about it in August. But this is an old school multi-dimensional feature that we've brought back to life here. And what we do is after we've initially loaded your data, we start a background caching process and imported your data transparently for you so that you don't have to manage it. So we know that, direct query from Power BI is a performant capability. The Vertipack engine can give you 10 times, 100 times performance. So rather than ask you to, manage that orchestration process, build a job in Power Automate or something, in Azure PaaS or third party, we just do it for you. And this means we opportunistically always try to put your data in import mode. And you don't have to do anything for this. It just works. So when we look at the telemetry for a lot of our data marts today, the majority of them are actually in import mode. What this means is that we're just handling it for you, and you can get that awesome performance. You don't have to choose between latency and speed. You can just choose data marts. And we talked about how management and some of those things are a goal for us to reduce. This is another one of those areas where we're doing that for you.
Yeah, and then when you refresh the data, actually, let's talk about that too. So how often can you refresh it? Do we support like incremental refresh and things like this too?
So that's actually a really good point, and something that I didn't call out in our best practices, but it is a capability you want to leverage. And we have the capability from Dataflows for incremental refresh. This allows you to, one, leverage query folding on like a relational data source, but then secondarily sort of store and collect data, based on some business logic. So you don't have to always have a long-wielded latency load. You can just focus on the new data that's coming in and tell Power BI how you want to do that. And this is another way where we can build on those capabilities, make sure that we always keep your data up to date, fresh. Then the data mart can be a lot smarter about when it does refresh, how it gets you your data as fast as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. I was going to ask one more thing, but now I forgot what it was. Oh, yeah. So what is the tipping point? So can we just start loading data into it? And when do we stop? Are we going to give an error message at one point, or and how is that being calculated?
Yeah. So we do compress the data when we load it in, but right now what we're recommending is 100 gigabytes as the recommended amount of data that you load into a data mart.
Max.
And you can use some of the stored procedures. Yeah, that's what we're recommending. The data mart can hold more than that, but that's kind of the recommended volume where we really feel like it's number one, a good fit when you think about self-service versus enterprise analytics. If you already have a data warehouse where you kind of position these things and they make sense. But the second part is that 100 gigs is a lot of data. So if you really think about a departmental self-service analytics where you have compressed data, that's quite a ton of information that you've now stored and sort of collected so that an analyst or a business unit can do more with it. But the other part of that is it will give you a good experience because we use Power Query Dataflows to load data in. And so if you think about, moving really fast, that 100 gigs, that's kind of what goes into it. The ingestion, be able to make sure it makes sense with all the other analytic assets you have. And then finally, making sure that we can actually import the data. So we talked about that automatic import mode. 100 gigs is very thoughtful thinking about that, just so that we can keep that super fast and super performant as well. But this is something that we may change as we learn from what customers need. When we look at the usage of Datamarts today, we're not very close to the majority of those Datamarts using that 100 gigs. We have a lot smaller use cases for the majority, but we also have customers using much more than that, like an order of magnitude more than that. And Datamarts can hold more than that. But again, we recommend that 100 gigs for sure.
But going back to the capacity model, like, is it going to mirror, or maybe you don't know yet? You can also say that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but like today in a P1, you can have, from top of my head, 25 gig data set. Is that the same thing? When you buy P1, you have a 25 gig data mart, or are we going to have different levels, or we don't know yet?
So right now, what I would say is we want to be fair, and we're learning from how customers are using this today. So it's hard to say right now, to your point, Kasper, because the way that customers are using these are all over the place. But when we do launch this and we provide you with that billing visibility and we go GA, we'll be fair about like how customers want to use this today based on the patterns that we see and everything else. If we're seeing a lot of customers doing things where increasing that makes sense, that'll definitely be something we take a look at. If we're not, then it'll work the way that it does now. But this is one of the reasons why we have the preview. Datamarts very much changed the game for how we traditionally had limits on capacities, because now you have this SQL database where you can store and collect your data, and we also auto-generate a data set. So we're very keenly aware of all that. That's one of the reasons why that billing visibility is super important to us. We know it's important to you, but it's also one of the reasons why this preview period is important, because like I said, we have customers that are using massive amounts of data inside of a data mart. We also have customers that are using less than a gigabyte data inside of a data mart, and they're using these things in your real production scenarios. So as the preview goes on and as we continue to release more capabilities, I think this will be an area where we'll provide more clarity to customers on how to think about and plan for this stuff.
Makes sense. All right, cool. Well, I have one last question that I always ask everyone, and you cannot say Datamarts. What is the most exciting feature of Power BI that you released that was released in the last year?
Oh, by far and away, the PowerPoint integration. This is something that's like a no-brainer inside of Power BI. If you think about an analyst that needs to get their job done, and organizations that are trying to make decisions with data, you've already spent all your time building a interactive, clicky, draggy, droppy report to harness sufficient weight in here, right? And now you have to go, before this capability, export this capability of a static image. And we had an amazing third-party ecosystem where our partners, ISVs, were building solutions to be able to embed a Power BI report directly. But this integration is just so smooth. We use this all the time to run our own business. A lot of our customers are doing the same thing, and it just makes total sense. In one click, you can sort of have all your Power BI assets available to you, and then you've got this interactive report and a really seamless experience. It's awesome. So this is my favorite by far capability. It's one of the most underrated capabilities inside of Power BI. Datamarts do integrate with it, but this is definitely something that is a killer functionality. It's when you talk about mobilizing your data and making data-driven decisions, the ability to be in a meeting where there's chaos going on outside, you come together, analyze the data, ask questions on the fly, and then move. Super powerful.
Yeah, I can see your previous sales hat. You wish you would have had this when you were in the field.
I mean, I wish I would have had this when I was an analytics practitioner too.
Yeah,
the amount of times I had to copy and paste was nuts. So this is super cool functionality, and I really generally our whole Power BI team, they move so fast. It's been really neat to just be a part of that and see the velocity and the empathy that they have for customers and the passion they have for just delivering really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why I've been here. I love it,
Yeah.
and it's a good journey. All right, so Charles, I really want to thank you for your time. I think we've learned a lot about Datamarts. Probably will have you back at one point for the when we can start talking about other things. And in a year from now, who knows what we've shipped and who knows what we've done. Even we don't know yet. So that's the fun part. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I think we got some good answers. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Kasper. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
See you.
And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I think we had a great conversation with Charles talking about everything Datamarts. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope you start playing with Datamarts a bit more, giving us feedback on it. If you like this, there's much more coming. There's a really exciting episode coming up next. So hit the subscribe button. If you like the episode, hit the like button. And I want to thank you for your time, and I'll see you next time.